The crystal wine glass felt like an extension of his own hand, a symbol of the world Julian Croft had meticulously built. From his corner booth at Aria, Tribeca's latest temple of haute cuisine, he could survey his kingdom. The low hum of conversation, the glint of expensive watches, the deferential nod from the maitre d'. It was all his. Across the table, Isabel Vance, a woman as polished and perfect as the life he curated, smiled a perfectly painted smile. And then he saw her. Behind the gleaming mahogany bar, a ghost from his past, her form unmistakably swollen with child. His ex-wife, Eleanor. His world didn't just tilt, it fractured. The air in Aurea was temperature-controlled to a precise 72 degrees, scented with hints of truffle oil and old money. For Julian Croft, CEO of Croft Holdings, it was the atmosphere of victory. He had just closed the landmark Sterling Vanguard merger, a deal that would cement his legacy on Wall Street before his 35th birthday. Isabel, his girlfriend of 6 months, was the perfect accessory for the celebration. Her laughter was light, her dress was a sliver of black silk, and her understanding of his world was transactional and blessedly uncomplicated. "To us," she said, raising her glass. Her diamond bracelet caught the light, scattering tiny rainbows across the table. "And to making the Forbes list again," Julian smiled, a practiced, confident curl of his lips. "It's inevitable." He leaned in to kiss her, the motion smooth and rehearsed. But as his eyes drifted past her perfectly coiffed hair, they snagged on a figure at the bar. A woman was polishing glasses, her back to him. There was a weariness in her posture that felt achingly familiar. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, severe ponytail, a few stray strands clinging to her neck. She turned to take an order, and the ambient noise of the restaurant faded into a dull roar in Julian's ears. It was Eleanor, but it wasn't the Elena he remembered. The vibrant woman who once commanded marketing boardrooms, whose laughter could fill their sprawling penthouse, was gone. This woman's face was pale, with dark circles under her eyes that even the dim lighting couldn't hide. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if weighed down by a burden far heavier than the tray of drinks she was carrying. And then he saw it, the undeniable, prominent curve of her belly beneath the cheap, black uniform of a bartender. Pregnant. Elena was pregnant. The wine turned to acid in his stomach. A cold sweat prickled his neck. The timeline scrambled in his head. They had been divorced for 10 months, a clean, brutal break he had orchestrated with the efficiency of a corporate takeover. He had his lawyers draft an ironclad NDA and a settlement he knew her pride would never let her accept. She had walked away with nothing but her clothes and a shattered heart, just as he'd intended. He had wanted a clean slate. "Julian, are you all right?" Isabel's voice cut through the fog. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He had. A ghost of his own making. He watched, frozen as Eleanor carefully handed a drink to a customer, her hand slightly trembling. She winced, a fleeting spasm of pain crossing her face as she pressed a hand to the small of her back. The sight was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. The woman who had once worn Chanel to charity galas was now serving cocktails to men like him, carrying his child while he toasted his success with his new lover. The power imbalance he had so carefully cultivated during their marriage suddenly felt grotesque. He had called her weak for wanting a career, then belittled her for being a housewife. He had demanded she be his beautiful, silent partner, and when her spirit refused to break, he had discarded her. I need some air," he managed to say, his voice strained. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair slightly. Isabel's perfectly arched eyebrows rose in surprise. "Is everything okay?" He couldn't answer. His gaze was locked on Eleanor, who had finally, inevitably, looked up and scanned the room. For a horrifying second, their eyes met across the expanse of linen and crystal. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a wave of such profound pain and raw fury that it felt like she had screamed his name. She quickly turned away, her shoulders rigid, but it was too late. The mask was off. His world, so meticulously constructed, so impenetrably secure, was collapsing in on him. And as he stood there, paralyzed in the center of his perfect life, Isabel followed his gaze, her sharp eyes landing on the pregnant bartender. She looked from Eleanor back to Julian's ashen face, and the cool, transactional understanding in her expression began to curdle into something else entirely. Contempt. Julian didn't wait for the valet. He strode out of Aria's gilded doors and into the cool autumn night, the sounds of the city, a jarring cacophony. He circled the block, his mind racing, before positioning himself in the shadows of the service alley behind the restaurant. He had to talk to her. He had to fix this. That was what he did. He identified problems, a market downturn, a hostile board, a pregnant ex-wife serving drinks, and he applied resources until they were solved. The metal door creaked open 20 minutes later, and Eleanor emerged, carrying a bag of trash. The harsh fluorescent light from the kitchen spilled out behind her, illuminating her exhausted face. She looked smaller than he remembered, swallowed by the darkness of the alley. "Elena," he said, stepping out of the shadows. She flinched, dropping the bag. It split on the grimy pavement, spilling coffee grounds and lemon peels. Her hand flew to her stomach, a protective, instinctual gesture. Her eyes, when they met his, were not just angry. They were deadened, as if looking at a stranger she had no energy left to hate. "What do you want, Julian?" Her voice was flat, devoid of the warmth it once held. "I saw you in there," he began, his own voice sounding hollow. "Working. You're pregnant?" A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "Your powers of observation are astounding as ever. Go back to your girlfriend and your champagne." She bent down stiffly to clean up the mess. "Don't," he said, moving forward. "I'll get it. We need to talk. This is unacceptable." "Unacceptable?" She straightened up, her eyes flashing with a spark of the old fire. "What's unacceptable, Julian? That your carefully curated world was disrupted for a moment. That you had to see the consequence of your actions. The mess you left behind." "I'll give you money," he said, the words tasting like ash. It was his default solution, the universal solvent for all of life's unpleasantries. "Whatever you need. A check. Set up a trust for the baby." "You don't have to do this." He gestured vaguely at the restaurant, at her uniform, at the entire scene. Her reaction was not what he expected. She didn't cry or scream. She looked at him with a chilling sort of pity. "You still don't get it, do you?" she whispered, the sound swallowed by the alley's echoes. "You think money is the answer to everything. You think you can write a check and absolve yourself." She took a step closer, and for the first time, he saw the true depth of her exhaustion, the bruising around her soul. "Let me tell you what you did, Julian. Not the cheating. That was just a symptom. You hollowed me out. You convinced me my ambitions in marketing were cute, but ultimately unimportant compared to your empire. You isolated me from my friends because they weren't on our level. You criticized the way I dressed, the way I spoke, the way I laughed, until I started to see myself through your disgusted eyes. Each word was a precise, surgical cut. He remembered it all, scoffing at her proposal for a campaign she was proud of, telling her that her college friend was boorish, complaining that her laughter was too loud at a black tie event. At the time, they had seemed like minor corrections, tweaks to perfect the image of Mrs. Julian Croft. Now, in this grimy alley, they sounded like acts of systematic cruelty. I left you with nothing because I wanted to be free of you, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Taking your money would mean you still owned a piece of me. I'd rather scrub floors than be indebted to you for one more second of my life. But the baby, he stammered. Is it mine? She cut him off, her voice like steel. I found out a week after I left, after the lawyers, after the papers, after you had the locks changed. This baby is mine. The one good thing to come out of the wreckage. The finality in her voice was absolute. He was not a part of this. He was an outsider, a spectator to the most important event of his life. The power had shifted. In his world of boardrooms and stock prices, he was a king. Here, in this alley, faced with the woman he had broken, he had no leverage. His wealth was meaningless. His influence was zero. He reached out, an involuntary gesture of appeal. Elena, please, let me help. Help! She recoiled as if his hand were on fire. The most helpful thing you can do, Julian, is to get in your 6-figure car, go back to your penthouse, and pretend tonight never happened. Disappear. It's the one thing you were always good at. She turned and walked back into the restaurant, the metal door slamming shut behind her, with a deafening clang that echoed the closing of a door in his own heart. He was left alone in the alley, the stench of garbage in his nostrils, the mess from the split bag at his feet. His world had not just collapsed, it had been dismantled, piece by piece, by the woman he thought he had erased. Returning to the table was like re-entering a movie scene after forgetting all his lines. The ambience of Aurea, once a comforting cocoon of success, now felt suffocating and artificial. Isabel was sipping her wine, her expression unreadable. The smile she offered him as he sat down didn't reach her eyes. So, she began, her voice smooth and cool as marble. Are you going to tell me what that was all about? Julian fumbled for a lie, a plausible excuse, a disgruntled former employee, a case of mistaken identity. But looking into Isabel's intelligent, analytical eyes, he knew a flimsy story would be an insult. She was a partner at a competing investment firm. She didn't get to her position by being naive. That was my ex-wife, he said, the admission heavy in the air. The bartender, Isabel stated, not a question. The pregnant bartender. She took a slow, deliberate sip of wine. I assume, given the timeline of your clean break, that some congratulations are in order for you as well. Her tone was razor sharp. There was no jealousy in it, not in the traditional sense. It was the detached assessment of a risk analyst who had just discovered a massive, undisclosed liability. It's complicated, Izzy, he said, hating the weakness in his own voice. No, it's not, she countered, placing her glass down with a soft click. It's remarkably simple. You have a past that is very much not in the past. A past that is about to become a present in approximately 9 months. A past that is currently serving gin and tonics to pay her rent. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Julian, in all our conversations about the future, our 5-year plans, the potential synergies between our firms, where exactly did your destitute, pregnant ex-wife fit into the projection? He had no answer. He had never considered it. Eleanor was supposed to have vanished, to have been absorbed back into whatever world she came from before him. He had paid his lawyers a fortune to ensure it. I didn't know, he finally managed, about the baby. Or this. But you knew what you did to her, Isabel said, her voice dropping lower. I saw your face when you looked at her. That wasn't just shock, Julian. That was guilt. The kind of deep, foundational guilt a man has when he knows he's destroyed someone. She sat back, her assessment complete. I've seen you in the boardroom. You're ruthless, efficient, and you always cut your losses before they can damage the bottom line. You treated your marriage like a failed acquisition. You stripped its assets and liquidated it, expecting the human element to just evaporate. He felt a surge of defensiveness. You don't understand our relationship. I understand it perfectly now, she said, a flicker of something almost like pity in her eyes. She was a person, and you treated her like a line item on a balance sheet. And now your accounting has come due. She picked up her clutch from the table, a sleek, black rectangle of designer leather. The problem, Julian, is that you're not just obsessed with your success. You're obsessed with your failures. And she, Isabel nodded subtly toward the bar, is the biggest failure of your life. You won't be able to look away. And frankly, I have no desire to be a spectator to your long, drawn-out process of self-flagellation and attempted redemption. Her words were a perfect, brutal diagnosis of the sickness he was only just beginning to feel. She saw his character flaw with the clarity he usually reserved for flawed business models. She stood up, her movements fluid and decisive. Thank you for dinner. And the merger. My firm will send a celebratory gift basket. It was a cold, corporate dismissal. Good luck with your situation. She walked away without a backward glance, a portrait of self-possession and calculated detachment. She was everything he thought he wanted, a woman who understood his world, who wouldn't burden him with messy emotions. And she had just left him because she recognized that the mess he had made was too toxic even for her. Julian sat alone at the table, surrounded by the remnants of a victory feast. The mirror he held up to himself had always reflected a titan, a winner, a master of the universe. But Isabel and the ghost in the alley had just shown him the truth. The mirror was cracked, and the man staring back was a coward and a bully, his empire built on a foundation of ruin. And for the first time in his life, Julian Croft had no idea what to do next. The next few days were a blur of managed chaos. On the surface, Julian was the picture of control. He led the post-merger integration meetings with his usual sharp authority, his voice betraying none of the turmoil that roiled beneath his $1,000 suit. But it was a performance, and the cracks were beginning to show. He found himself staring out his 80th floor office window for long stretches, the sprawling city below looking like a map of his own failures. Every pregnant woman he saw on the street was a jolt to his system. He snapped at his assistant for a minor scheduling error. During a crucial negotiation with the former Vanguard executives, he zoned out, completely missing a key question. His mind wasn't on synergy or shareholder value. It was in a grimy alley, replaying Elena's words over and over. You hollowed me out. His world wasn't just collapsing emotionally. The tremors were beginning to threaten the foundations of his professional empire. The only person he could think to call was Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been his best friend since their days at Wharton, the only one who had ever dared to call Julian out on his behavior. He'd been the best man at their wedding and had maintained a quiet, awkward friendship with Elena after the divorce. They met at a quiet, old-school bar downtown, the kind with dark wood and worn leather that smelled of whiskey and regret. "You look like hell," Marcus said bluntly, sliding into the booth. "Worse than after the .com bust." Julian swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I saw Elena." Marcus's expression tightened. "I know. She called me. Not to complain, just to give me a heads up in case you reached out. She's tough, man. She's pregnant, Marcus." The words came out as a ragged whisper. Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "I know that, too." "You knew?" Julian felt a fresh wave of betrayal and isolation. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because she asked me not to," Marcus said, his voice firm but not unkind. And because, frankly, what would you have done with the information, Julian? 6 months ago? You would have sent a lawyer. You would have seen it as a threat, another loose end to handle. You weren't ready to hear it. The question is, are you ready now? Julian slumped against the leather seat, the fight going out of him. I don't know. I went to see her. I offered her money. She looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Good, Marcus said. Julian looked up, stunned. Good? Yes, good. Because it's the truth. For the last 10 years, you've operated under the assumption that you're the sun, and everyone else is just a planet in your orbit. Elena was the brightest one, and you flew too close and burned her up. You need to understand what that feels like from the ground. You need to feel the scorch marks. Marcus leaned in, his voice dropping. I love you like a brother, you know that. But I was there. I saw how you treated her. I saw you belittle her career choice in front of her new boss at that Christmas party. I saw you leave her standing on the street in the rain because you were angry she was 5 minutes late. I saw you become someone I barely recognized, and I didn't say enough. That's on me. But this is your chance to actually see it for yourself. The memories, refracted through his friend's eyes, were even more damning. He had seen those events as trivial, instances of him maintaining standards. Now he saw them for what they were. Small, consistent acts of cruelty designed to erode her confidence and cement his control. Isabel left me, Julian confessed, the words tasting like failure. She said I was obsessed with my failure, with Elena, that she didn't want to watch. She's a smart woman, Marcus said, taking a sip of his drink. She's right. This is going to be a long, ugly process, Julian. You can't just throw money at this and make it go away. This is a debt that has to be paid in humility, in effort, in time. So what do I do? Julian asked, his voice raw with a desperation he hadn't felt since he was a scholarship kid trying to survive his first year of business school. How do I fix this? You don't. Not yet, Marcus advised. The first thing you fix is yourself. You're a mess. You're imploding at work. You're lost in your own head. You need to talk to someone. Not me. Not some corporate yes man. A professional. Therapy. The word itself felt alien. A concept for other people. Weak people. People who couldn't control their own minds. I'm not. Yes, you are, Marcus interrupted. You're a man who systematically dismantled the person he claimed to love and can't comprehend why she won't accept his check. You have no idea who you are without your title and your stock portfolio. You need to figure that out before you can even think about being a father. Before you have any right to even be in the same room as her and that baby. The words hit their mark, brutal and true. He was a hollow man, a king in a kingdom of glass, and the walls were shattering. Marcus slid a business card across the table. It was simple, elegant, with a name and a number. Dr. Anya Sharma, Ph.D., Psychology. She's the best, Marcus said. No nonsense. Specializes in narcissism and personality disorders in high achievers. He paused. Just go. For the kid, if not for yourself. Julian stared at the card. It felt heavier than a merger prospectus, more intimidating than a hostile board. It was a lifeline to a shore he didn't recognize, and he was drowning. Taking it was the first admission of failure he had ever made, and the first terrifying step toward an unknown future. The office of Dr. Anya Sharma was nothing like Julian had expected. It wasn't a cold, clinical space. Located in a pre-war building on the Upper West Side, it was warm and lived in, with overflowing bookshelves, comfortable but worn armchairs, and abstract art on the walls. It was a room designed for introspection, not interrogation. Dr. Sharma herself was a woman in her late 50s, with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that Julian found immediately unsettling. He was used to commanding a room, to setting the agenda. Here, the power dynamic was inverted. He was the subject. "So, Mr. Croft," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "Marcus tells me you're facing some unexpected challenges." For the first 40 minutes, Julian did what he did best. He performed. He presented his problem as a strategic dilemma. He spoke of Eleanor in detached, almost legal terms, the ex-spouse, the unforeseen complication. He framed his guilt as a frustrating distraction that was affecting his professional performance. He was an architect whose most complex blueprint had suddenly revealed a fatal flaw, and he was here to consult with an expert on how to patch it. Dr. Sharma listened patiently, her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't interrupt, didn't challenge. She just let him talk, let him spin his narrative of control and inconvenience. When he finally wound down, feeling he had adequately framed the situation, she leaned forward slightly. "You've described Elena's situation as a problem that needs to be solved. You've mentioned your guilt primarily in the context of how it's impacting your work. You've used the word I 47 times. You have not, however, once used the word love." The observation hung in the air, simple and devastating. "I did love her," Julian said, a defensive edge to his voice. "Tell me about it," she invited. "Not the wedding in the Hamptons or the trips to Monaco. Tell me about a small moment. A moment you felt it." His mind went blank. He tried to grasp a memory, but they were all colored by the grand gestures, the public displays. He remembered buying her a Cartier necklace after a fight, leasing a convertible for her birthday. But those were transactions, payments for peace. He couldn't recall a simple, quiet moment of connection. His memory was an archive of his own largesse, not of their shared intimacy. I can't," he admitted, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. "That's a more honest answer than the one you were preparing," Dr. Sharma said softly. "Let's talk about the man who belittled his wife's career. Why did her ambition bother you, Julian?" "I wanted her to be happy," he said, falling back on his old justifications. "To relax. She didn't need to work. Or did her success threaten to exist outside of your control?" she countered. "If she had her own career, her own victories, she wouldn't be solely reliant on you for her sense of self-worth. Was that the fear? That she might build something for herself that you didn't own?" It was like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. He remembered the sharp pang of something, jealousy, annoyance, when she had won a major industry award for a campaign she designed. He had praised her in public, but in private, he had subtly undermined it, calling it a niche achievement. He hadn't wanted a partner, he had wanted a beautiful subsidiary. Over the next few sessions, Dr. Sharma patiently and relentlessly dismantled his defenses. She made him confront specific memories, not as the hero of his own story, but as the antagonist in Eleanor's. They talked about his childhood, his relentless drive to escape the poverty of his upbringing, and how that drive had morphed into a pathological need for control over every aspect of his life. His beautiful wife, his perfect home, his soaring career, they weren't sources of joy, but assets in a portfolio designed to prove his worth. The process was brutal. There were sessions where he left feeling angry and raw, convinced it was a waste of time. There were others where he sat in his car afterward, a profound and hollow emptiness washing over him as he confronted the man he had become. The real breakthrough came during a discussion about his impending fatherhood. "What kind of father do you want to be?" Dr. Sharma asked. "A good one," he answered automatically. "I want to provide for him. Give him everything I never had." "You are already in a position to provide financially," she pointed out. "That's the easy part for you. What will you teach him about how to treat people? About how to love a woman? What example will you set?" The question floored him. He imagined a teenage son, his son, looking at him and asking about his mother. What would he say? "I broke her spirit because it was inconvenient for me. I let her struggle alone while I dined at fine restaurants." The thought of his son seeing him through Elena's eyes, seeing the selfish, cruel man he had been, was unbearable. It was a shame so profound it felt like a physical illness. For the first time in that office, Julian Croft broke. The carefully constructed dam of his pride and arrogance crumbled, and he wept. Not for his collapsing career or his lost girlfriend, but for the man he had failed to be, for the woman he had hurt beyond measure, and for the child who deserved a father far better than the man he currently was. It wasn't a solution or an absolution. It was a beginning, a painful, terrifying, and necessary demolition of the self. The therapy sessions were demolition. The work that followed was reconstruction, brick by painful brick. Julian learned that true atonement wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't about showing up on Eleanor's doorstep with a check for $1 million and a rehearsed apology. That was the old Julian's way, an attempt to buy forgiveness, to control the narrative. Dr. Sharma taught him that redemption was quiet. It was in the small, consistent actions that expected nothing in return. He started by giving her the one thing she had asked for: space. He resisted every impulse to call, to text, to force a confrontation. Instead, he began to learn about her life from a distance, using a private investigator not to spy, but to understand. The reports he received were a daily testament to her quiet strength and his own past cruelty. He learned she lived in a small, third-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens. She took the subway to her 2 part-time jobs, bartending at Aria and doing freelance graphic design work on the side, trying to claw her way back into the industry he'd forced her out of. She was alone, with only one close friend, a fellow designer named Chloe, to lean on. His first act was anonymous. Through the investigator, he learned about the specific prenatal vitamins her doctor had recommended, which were expensive and often out of stock at her local pharmacy. He had his assistant arrange for a year's supply to be delivered to her apartment from an online wellness rewards program she had supposedly won. He found out from a snippet of conversation Chloe had posted on social media that Elena was craving a specific type of soup from a small restaurant in the East Village they used to love. He arranged for a delivery service to leave a promotional care package at her door, filled with the soup and other comfort foods. No note, no name, just a quiet offering. He knew these were small, almost insignificant things. They didn't undo the years of damage, but they were acts of service, not control. They were about meeting her needs, not salving his conscience. His work life continued its slow-motion collapse. The fire, the relentless drive that had made him a legend on Wall Street, had been banked. He was distracted, thoughtful, and in the cutthroat world of finance, thoughtfulness was often mistaken for weakness. He lost a major client because his heart wasn't in the pitch. The board of directors called a meeting to discuss his recent lack of focus. The old Julian would have been terrified, enraged. The new Julian accepted it as a necessary consequence. The empire he had built on a rotten foundation had to fall before he could build anything real. One evening, driven by an impulse he couldn't control, he took a car service to Astoria. He didn't approach her building. He just parked across the street, and watched. He saw her come home, slowly climbing the steps to her building, one hand on her belly, and the other holding a small bag of groceries. She looked bone-tired, but her shoulders were straight. There was a resilience in her he had never truly appreciated, a strength he had tried to extinguish, but had only tempered into steel. Watching her disappear into the building, a profound realization washed over him. He wasn't in love with the memory of the woman he married. He was falling in love with the woman she had become in spite of him. A survivor. A mother. A warrior. The next day, he took the biggest step yet. He contacted a headhunter who specialized in the marketing and advertising world. "I have a candidate for you," he said, his voice steady. "Her name is Elena Reyes. She was a senior campaign director at Ogilvy before she took a sabbatical. She's brilliant, creative, and she's been out of the game for a few years, so she'll be underestimated. I want you to find her the perfect opportunity, a senior role, a place that values talent. And she can never, ever know I was involved." He was using his power not to control her, but to empower her, to give back a fraction of the future he had stolen. It was a long shot, and it might lead to nothing, but it was an action. It was a brick laid on a new foundation, a foundation built not on power or possession, but on respect. He didn't know if she would ever forgive him. He was beginning to understand that he didn't have a right to expect it. The work wasn't for her forgiveness. It was for his own soul. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in February. The city was silenced by a thick blanket of snow, and Julian was awake, staring at the ceiling of his cavernous, empty penthouse. The phone buzzed on his nightstand, and his heart seized. The caller ID read, "Chloe, Elena's friend." "It's time." Chloe's voice was tight with urgency and a clear note of hostility. "Her water broke an hour ago. She's at Mount Sinai. She didn't want me to call you." "But you did," Julian said, already out of bed, pulling on clothes. "Yes," Chloe snapped, "because she's scared and she's alone. And as much as I despise you, you're the father of this baby. Don't you dare make me regret this, Croft. Don't you dare come in here like a wrecking ball." The line went dead. The drive to the hospital was surreal. The snow-filled streets were deserted, and his car moved through a silent, white world. His mind, however, was screaming. All the therapy, all the quiet acts of atonement, all the self-reflection. None of it had prepared him for the terrifying, visceral reality of this moment. He was about to become a father. He found the maternity ward and saw Chloe pacing in the waiting area. She stopped when she saw him, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and fierce protectiveness. "She doesn't want to see you," she said bluntly. "Her contractions are getting close. She's in a lot of pain. The last thing she needs is the stress of dealing with you." The old Julian would have pushed past her, asserted his rights, made a scene. The man standing before her now just nodded, his throat tight. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse. "I won't go in." Is she okay?" His quiet acquiescence seemed to surprise Chloe. Her defensive posture softened slightly. "It's hard, but she's strong. Stronger than anyone I know." "I know," he whispered. "Can you just let me know? I'll wait out here, for as long as it takes." He sat on one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, and he waited. He didn't check his phone, didn't pace. He just sat, suspended in time, his entire universe shrunk to the closed door of Eleanor's room. Hours passed. He heard the muffled sounds of medical staff, the distant beep of machines, and once a cry of pain from Eleanor that ripped through him. He closed his eyes, sending a silent, desperate prayer into the sterile air, not for forgiveness, but for her safety. Just after dawn, a nurse came out and spoke to Chloe. Chloe's face broke into a relieved, tearful smile. She looked over at Julian, hesitated for a long moment, and then walked toward him. "It's a boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Leo, he's healthy. 7 pounds, 8 ounces. Relief washed over Julian so intensely his legs felt weak. "And Eleanor? She's exhausted, but she's okay. She's amazing." Chloe paused, studying his face. "She knows you're here. The nurse told her. She said you could come in for 5 minutes." He walked toward the door as if in a dream. He pushed it open gently. The room was dim, quiet except for the softest mewling sound. Elena was propped up on the pillows, her face pale and damp with sweat, her hair clinging to her forehead. She looked utterly spent, but her eyes, when they met his, held a new light. And in her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was the most perfect, tiny human being he had ever seen. He approached the bed slowly, afraid the slightest sound would shatter the sacredness of the moment. "Elena," he breathed. She didn't answer, just watched him with those tired, knowing eyes. He looked down at his son. A tiny, wrinkled face, a tuft of dark hair, a small hand that opened and closed, grasping at the air. His son, Leo. In that instant, the last remaining vestiges of the old Julian Croft, the CEO, the titan, the master of the universe, crumbled into dust. They were replaced by a feeling so raw and overwhelming it brought him to his knees. It was love. A pure, unconditional, terrifying love for this tiny life, and a wave of profound, gut-wrenching remorse and admiration for the incredible woman who had brought him into the world. Tears streamed down his face, silent and unchecked. He didn't try to wipe them away. "I'm sorry," he choked out, the words finally stripped of all artifice, all strategy. They were just the plain, unvarnished truth. "Elena, for everything. I am so sorry." She watched him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she shifted slightly, making a small space on the edge of the bed. It wasn't a pardon. It wasn't absolution. But it was an invitation to step out of the cold and into the fragile, terrifying, beautiful light of his new world. Bringing a child into the world together didn't magically erase the past. The months that followed Leo's birth were a delicate, complicated dance of co-parenting. Forgiveness wasn't a destination they arrived at in the hospital room. It was a long, unpaved road. They had to choose to walk down every single day, and it was filled with obstacles. Julian learned the language of humility. He didn't try to take over. He showed up. He showed up for the 2 a.m. feedings at her small Astoria apartment, not with a nanny, but with coffee for her and a willingness to learn how to change a diaper. He was clumsy at first, his large hands fumbling with the tiny clothes, but he was persistent. He sat on her second-hand sofa and rocked his son to sleep while she got a few precious hours of rest. There were moments of friction, echoes of their old dynamic. Once, he instinctively criticized the brand of formula she was using, suggesting a more expensive, better one. The look of hurt and anger in her eyes was immediate. "Don't do that, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Don't fix my choices. We are not married. You are not my boss. You are Leo's father." That's it. He recoiled as if slapped. The old Julian would have argued, defended his position. The new Julian just nodded and said, "You're right. I'm sorry." And he never did it again. He saw her not just as Leo's mother, but as Eleanor again. He saw the fatigue, but also the fire reigniting in her eyes. The headhunter he'd contacted had come through, an up-and-coming digital advertising agency, intrigued by her old portfolio and the recruiter's glowing recommendation, offered her a project-based role. It was a step down from where she'd been, but it was a foot back in the door. He watched her prepare for her first presentation, spreading her notes out on her small kitchen table, a baby monitor beside her. He saw the familiar spark of creative genius, the passion he had tried to extinguish. "You're going to be incredible," he told her, and he meant it. On the day of the presentation, he insisted on taking Leo for the entire day. He didn't hire help. He took his son to his own penthouse, a place that now felt sterile and wrong, and he cared for him. He fed him, played with him, and walked him for hours in Central Park, feeling the strange, curious stares of people who recognized the infamous CEO awkwardly trying to soothe a crying baby. It felt more real and more important than any billion-dollar merger. Elena came back that evening, her face flushed with excitement. "I got it," she said, a brilliant, genuine smile lighting up her face. "They offered me a permanent position, senior strategist. I knew it," he said, handing the sleeping baby to her. There was never any doubt. That night, as he was about to leave, she stopped him at the door. "Julian," she said, her tone serious. "Chloe told me about the vitamins, the soup deliveries. She did some digging." "Was that you?" He couldn't lie. He simply nodded. She looked at him, her gaze searching. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because it wasn't for you to be grateful," he said, the words coming from the core of his new self. "It was for me to be useful. You asked for space, and I needed to respect that. But I also needed to care for you, even if you didn't know it." It was a turning point. She didn't say, "I forgive you," but a layer of the wall between them came down. She started to occasionally accept his offers of help. He helped her find a new, larger apartment in a safer building, framing it as a necessity for Leo. He didn't pay for it, but he co-signed the lease, using his financial standing to open a door for her that her own salary couldn't yet. He also had to face her family. He flew to Chicago and sat in her parents' living room, a place he had once dismissed as suburban, and he apologized. He apologized to her father for his arrogance and to her mother for the pain he had caused their daughter. He didn't make excuses. He just owned his failures. They were skeptical, but his sincerity and the clear, profound love he had for their grandson began to slowly, painstakingly win them over. It was a slow, arduous process of rebuilding trust, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet consistency of a man who finally understood that love wasn't about ownership. It was about showing up, day after day, and doing the work. 5 years later, the scene is not a glitzy restaurant or a sterile penthouse. It's a sun-drenched backyard in a quiet New Jersey suburb. The air is filled with the scent of cut grass and the sound of children's laughter. Leo, now a boisterous 5-year-old with his father's eyes and his mother's smile, is chasing a soccer ball with a group of friends. It's his birthday party. Elena, now a partner at her agency and one of the most respected names in her field, moves through the party with an easy, confident grace. She's talking to other parents, her laughter full and uninhibited. She is vibrant, whole, a woman who has rebuilt her life, not on the ashes of her past, but on a foundation of her own strength. Julian is at the grill, wearing a faded polo shirt and an apron that says, "Danger, Man Cooking." He is flipping burgers, a task he performs with the same focus he once reserved for quarterly reports. Marcus is beside him, a beer in his hand, watching his friend. If you'd told me 10 years ago that Julian Croft's biggest concern on a Saturday would be nailing the perfect medium rare for a bunch of 5-year-olds, I'd have had you committed, Marcus says with a laugh. Julian smiles, a genuine, relaxed smile that reaches his eyes. Things change. He sold his company 3 years ago. He walked away from the cutthroat world of high finance, realizing he no longer had the stomach or the desire for it. He now runs a small venture capital fund that invests exclusively in businesses founded by women and underrepresented entrepreneurs. He uses his power not to build his own monument, but to help others lay their foundations. He and Elena are not the same couple they once were. The old relationship, built on a toxic dynamic of power and control, is dead and buried. This new one, which they started building a year ago, cautiously and with their eyes wide open, is a partnership of equals. It's built on shared laughter during late-night talks, on mutual respect for each other's careers, and on the unbreakable bond forged in the trenches of parenting. It's quieter, stronger, and infinitely more real. Later, as the party winds down, Julian finds Elena sitting on the porch swing, watching Leo play. He sits down beside her, their shoulders brushing. "He's happy," she says softly. "We're all happy," Julian replies, his voice filled with a gratitude that is now a permanent part of him. He looks at this incredible woman beside him, at the family they have built not by forgetting the past, but by learning from it. He knows his redemption is not a single act, but a lifelong commitment. A commitment to being the man his son believes him to be, and the man Elena deserves. He reaches out and takes her hand, their fingers lacing together naturally. It's a simple, quiet gesture, not an act of possession, but a promise of presence. A promise that he is finally, truly, home. The journey from a broken past to a healed future is never a straight line. Julian's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments don't have to define us. It's about owning your mistakes, doing the hard work to change, and understanding that a second chance isn't something you are given, but something you must earn, day by day, action by action. True wealth isn't found in a bank account or a penthouse view. It's found in the quiet moments of connection, in the difficult road to forgiveness, and in the courage to rebuild a life based on love and respect. What did you think of Julian's path to redemption? Could you have forgiven him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more emotional and inspiring stories. Thank you for watching.